Siddiqa is muted.
It's such a pleasure to welcome Molly. It's such an exciting time in her life and perhaps in the history of women's relationship with the church. She comes to us today she's at Castle Gandolfo near the Vatican Observatory, and she may very well be on the verge of making history for women in the Vatican. It's very exciting. Molly's an internationally recognized leader in cartography, which happens to be the study and practice of making and using maps. And her mission, which is just so revolutionary and interesting, is to help Catholic communities around the world use the property they own to support environmental and social justice work, while at the same time protecting and stabilizing their own financial situation. I mean, what a work. Molly is the founder and executive director of Goodlands, an innovative organization that gathers land records, maps, and other relevant data and digitizes them. Now, this is just sounds technical, but this is making it possible for Catholic institutions that own property to know what they have and consider how they can best use it for the benefit and appropriate needs of the local community. Imagine, they'll know this land and they'll be able to understand how to use it best. And part of Goodland's mission is also green infrastructure. And I'm sure Molly will explain that and its importance, because I did a little research last night and found out that the Catholic Church is far and away the largest landowner on the planet. The church owns more than 172 million acres. By contrast, the second largest landowner, which happens to be one woman, owns 29 million acres. So Molly has already made history. She was the chief cartographer of the first global digital map of the Catholic Church. This map, I get very excited about this. This map provided an accurate picture of the church's global presence and people for the first time in history. I mean, what a project. It was presented in 2016 at the Vatican's Art and Technology Council. 2 years later, in 2018, Molly received papal approval to establish a trial run of a cartography institute under the aegis of the Holy See. And this proposal is currently under negotiations. That's what Molly's there, she's negotiating. Now, this is the history-making element. If it is established, the Cartography Institution would be the first woman-founded institution in the history of the Roman Curia, and the first new scientific institute since the Vatican Observatory was founded in the 16th century to develop the Gregorian calendar we still use today. I could just talk about Molly forever, but I'll just say that Molly has received numerous awards, including the Sierra Club's 2021 Earth Care Award, joining such recipients as Wangari Maathai and Sir David Attenborough. She was given the United Nations Young Champion of the Earth Award in 2019 for North America. And this is the UN's highest award for youth-driven, I should say, environmental activism solutions. She's received a host of other honors, and what makes them so significant is it's so fascinating. This is the first time many of these awards have recognized explicitly faith-based work. And this sets a new precedent for the role of religious leadership in social entrepreneurship, innovation, and environmentalism. Molly's vision and solutions have demonstrated that real estate portfolios can be powerful leverage points for change, for grounding Catholic social teaching and for implementing the vision of Laudato Si. And she's received wide attention for this work. She's been profiled in publications around the world, including the BBC and the New Yorker magazine. And she has an upcoming TED Talk, which I hope we can hear at some point. So I feel excited and honored that Molly, with all this around her, going on around her, has taken the time to be with us today. So I'm just my pleasure to introduce Molly Burhans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadika, and everyone here. I'm just so grateful to be in the company of women, especially given that I'm in Rome right now, perhaps more than ever. I'm going to start off by sharing a bit about my journey, and I think something that I never really get the chance to talk about is my faith and the women who have informed and shaped it, and also my unique experiences, I would say, into this uncharted territory. So I'm going to begin with the presentation. Can you all see my screen? Wait a sec. Sorry. Can you see? Let's do this setup one more time. So Sadika is now the main picture, and I can't see. So can we switch?
I see you as the main picture.
Okay. Great. And share screen. And
You're going to, there we go. Excellent.
now you can see my screen.
We can.
Okay, great. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, it's a picture of men and women standing in front of the building. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to swap these actually.
I don't see that.
There.
It's a
Great.
small size at the moment. We're not getting full screen.
No.
Now can you see?
Molly, can you change the view at the top so we can see?
Now that's good. Yeah, now it's good.
You can see me.
Now I see
Now,
you. Let's see.
we'll get this. It's like so far into the pandemic and still technology. Now can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
and it's a slightly larger view.
Okay. Just make sure one more time. I don't know why this.
But it's still showing your notes, not this slide itself.
Molly, I'm going to try removing you from spotlighting. That sometimes helps with screen sharing.
Okay, let's try this. Let me screen share. You can see this.
Yes, Molly.
Perfect.
Although it just vanished.
There.
Oh, there we go. Excellent.
Okay, great.
Success.
So I'm going to take us back in time to 2016 in the summer, and I'm going to start my timer to make sure I stay on track. In 2016, I was 26 years old, and I found myself after a couple years of searching and a journey even to get there that I'll go into later that was wild. I found myself sitting in the Apostolic Palace asking the Secretary of State's office if I could meet with their cartographer or get a copy of Diocesan Boundaries for maps. They would be really helpful for mobilizing the church in a coordinated way to face the existential crisis of climate change. And I was led down this amazing hall called the Third Loggia, where their office is, covered in the most exquisite fresco cartographic masterpieces. And it was like I had died and gone to cartographic heaven. When I asked the prelates, they looked back at me and they said, "We don't have a cartographer." I asked, "What about your geography department?" "We don't have one." I showed them the graphic prototypes I made of global maps of ecclesiastical jurisdictions, which I'll get into that term in a couple minutes. So basically dioceses, provinces, even episcopal conferences. And they didn't have one. I thought the reason why I went there was I thought, of course, the Catholic Church must have this somewhere. And me nor the Yale students I'd been working with could turn up anything of a global map of the church. And I thought, gosh, I should let them know before we do this, because first, it'd be a massive waste of resources to replicate what they have inside. And because they must have this map, there must be some compelling security reason why it's not public. Well, the priest looked back at me after I showed them what I was looking for or wanted to do, and they indicated to the walls. Turns out the last map update we had had was, well, the frescoes about the Holy Roman Empire. Wow, there's a lot of work to be done. And I asked them if there was any reason why I should not make these maps. And they spoke in Italian for about 5 minutes, and I sat there wondering, can you be excommunicated for asking a question? I'd only been confirmed not very long prior, within the last couple of years before this. And the priest looked back and they said, why, yes, this would be useful for everything. And so I told them, I'll be back. I was an invited researcher at ESRI, the world's kind of premier geographic information system software based in Redlands, California. And this team had just finished mapping administrative three boundaries, so kind of sub-national like counties in the US for World Health and CDC. We didn't even have those global boundaries at the UN. And those are critical for enabling World Health and the CDC to track, monitor, and manage the Ebola outbreak. So following them, we had another big boundary project, ecclesiastical jurisdictions. And we finished that project in about half a year, following much research that I'd laid the foundation for going into it. And I premiered these at the Vatican Arts and Technology Council in Cascina Pio IV. This is a photo from the council. I was premiering them alongside Google, the MIT AI Lab, and Facebook. I could barely even afford a flight. Nevertheless, I couldn't afford a monastery when I first visited the Vatican those months prior. I actually had to stay in the Melting Pot, a 15 euro a night hostel, while I was running between palaces with prelates. These maps, when we showed them, were the first time any global leadership in the Catholic Church had ever seen the flock, the church, the institution that they're called to shepherd from a global scale. Now, in the years following, I thought, we must get funding after that. We had a really good plan and had already broken ground. Well, it wasn't quite that easy. And in 2017, though, this was kind of to my benefit. I was brought in to speak at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences at Connectivity as a Human Right, a conference where I was discussing alongside the former Prime Minister Romano Prodi and Jeffrey Sachs and Nicholas Negroponte, the founder of the MIT Media Lab, and others. And I started to cry to the staff at that conference in private in the back room because my work was so important. The Vatican was bringing me to speak alongside prime ministers, but I couldn't afford a place to stay between that and the youth symposium or other meetings I had there. And so the staff said, you know what, just stay in the domus. Cardinals do it all the time. No one will notice. And so I got to crash in the Pope's house. And this is a photo of me reading St. Hildegard von Bingen's work, actually. And this apartment I got to stay in is on the floor right below the Pope's. And I saw him at meals every day. And I met with bishops from fragile states like Syria and bishops and cardinals, I should say, from Syria, places like India, where I would bring my maps to the meals and we'd sit down and we'd talk about data security and policy, which is really integral to this work. And there's me hanging out with the Pope Mobile and in the Domus late one evening. But it was always a challenge, and this is something that I found as a woman in the church that continues. This is me, you can barely see my face. This is a video from that youth symposium that followed, where I began to cry because, as the captions iterate, I was running a multi-million-dollar organization based on the donations of work and staff and pro bono resources, and my salary was $7,000 a year. I was living in a donated house. I was couch surfing. I was eating beans and crying, as the New Yorker mentions, and I thankfully was still young enough to be on my parents' health insurance. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible. But despite that, I persisted. I gave up on the Vatican, actually, I should say about 6 months before this photo was taken. I'd been there for a full month. I lived in the Jesuit curia and the guest rooms, and I was there to get my office. A cardinal had given me an office. That cardinal just got indicted in the largest trial in the history of the Vatican for property. That was Archbishop Bechu. And I have no idea what's going on there. But it was good I didn't get my office, I'll say that. So I was there to figure out this office, and I couldn't find it. And after a month, I had learned that I was getting an Ashoka Fellowship, and it was a kind of moment to be done with the Vatican, where I'm kind of at once again. And that summer, so this summer 2018, I returned and I gave Pope Francis one of the maps I had made, Catholics per diocese, which is shown here, embellished with the cosmic visions of Hildegard von Bingen, my confirmation saint. And to my great surprise, just as I was about to pack up and get on the airplane back to the US, I opened my email, and there's an email in about 5 different languages, and I started translating them. Peace of Christ, Molly. We'd like to inform you that you are welcome to start a trial institute of 6 months under the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. It basically went on to say we had gotten approval for this, but as I started to translate the thread, I saw, I can't believe the meeting with Pope Francis about Molly Burhans went anywhere. Oh my gosh, people had been meeting about the Pope, talking about me. This was quite a lot. And I was shocked to learn that Pope Francis himself had approved that I establish the first female-founded trial-run institute in the Roman Curia, which could become potentially the first female-founded institute there. And I turned down the Pope. Not really, completely, but I was offered $3,000 or $30,000. I was offered no support to do the foundational policy that the projects that were given to me needed, nor any project, including the Laudato Si platform, desperately needs for the safety and security of millions of Catholic lives all over the world. And I was offered this minimal budget where I couldn't even live, and €2 canteen lunches, at least at the Vatican cafeteria. I needed a team of 5 people. And I knew exactly what we needed to bring this forward, and this was not correct. So that is what I'm doing now. I'm renegotiating this, and I've, sent in a proposal, and I am just praying. At this point, we can go into this later, but the content needs to happen, and I don't care who does it at this point. But how do you get there from being a kid growing up in Buffalo? I was born in New York City. It's kind of a cartoon map of the last couple of years for me, and ending up being this woman who makes the first global map of the Catholic Church and is negotiating with power players in the Vatican before the age of 30. Well, it's quite a long, fascinating story that goes from Buffalo to Joan Chittister's monastery in Erie, and thoughts about being a farmer nun to a small school in a barn in Western Massachusetts. And I'll go through this after I tell you exactly how we do the work that we do at Goodlands, and it will help explain and contextualize this all. So what do we actually do and why? The why is really considering the scope of the church. 18% of the world's population is Catholic, 1.3 billion people. 26% of healthcare facilities are Catholic. About 35 million elementary and secondary children are educated every year under Catholic education. And further, we provide the largest non-governmental network of humanitarian aid, unless you count all member organizations of the UN. It's second to that. So we're the largest non-governmental network of healthcare, aid, education. I thought, gosh, we must be the largest network of conservation. And we own so much land. As is mentioned, we own more land collectively under the umbrella of the church, but by many different organizations than anyone else. And that includes churches, schools, hospitals, monasteries, retreat centers, elderly homes, even oil wells and entire mountains. I am serious. I got a call from a patriarch with a problem with priests giving away mountains. And this is a map of all Catholic affiliated properties in the US that includes not just diocesan properties, but also religious orders, institutions, etc. So the property where this vision began is this property right here, the Erie Benedictines in Pennsylvania. And I was thinking about becoming a nun. I had been going there during my vacations from school, spending a lot of time there. My background had been scientific illustration, community organizing, and I was also co-founding my first company at the time, which is still operating. It's a worker-owned cooperative business model, so I don't have any shares, but it's one of those indoor vertical farms. So I was seeing how one of the many abandoned industrial spaces in Buffalo was being transformed to provide healthy, fresh food, address food justice in food deserts, and provide sustainable good jobs in a new economy based on cooperatives. And I thought, gosh, I could help the sisters with this perhaps. Now, this is a funny part that I won't go too deep into right now, but open to questions. I was not confirmed yet. I was also heavily debating the Jesuits at my school, God bless them, for doing that, because I was very reluctant to become Catholic. I was studied Greek for 2 years. I read through the Nicene Creed, and finally I lost the argument with Jesuits, and I had to get confirmed in a sense, and I say that very joyfully. I wasn't going to get confirmed unless I knew I could recite every bit of the creed with full, with actually believing it, and I do. But I also had been drawn to community and Christ and love long before that, through conversion. And these sisters really opened up my mind to what new community was. They showed love of Christ so well. And the conversion had showed me that the meaning of life is love. And that's the best answer I'll ever find, I think. We're put here to love, we're made to love, and we are created in love and are loved. And the question really had become how. And in this exposure to regenerative agriculture through the company I was co-founding, when I would go to the monastery, I'd just look out and I'd see potential, this vast mown lawn, and all these spaces that could be multiplying every impact of their ministry if better cared for. But how to actually multiply that impact, how to actually do this work. I decided to head off to a small school in a barn for city ecological design. And I say that lightly, but it's actually was an amazing education. It was founded by a landscape architect from Harvard who did his PhD on Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. And landscape architecture at the time was pretty much ended up people designing rich people's pools. At the end of the day, Ian McHarg, who wrote Designing with Nature, Buckminster Fuller, and this zeitgeist of not only designing with, but for communities with nature was filling in these different kind of niches, but it wasn't really grabbing a hold in academia, and it definitely wasn't grabbing a hold in practice yet. And so Walt, the person who founded this school, decided to change that. So I decided to go to this school and thought I would be a farmer nun and return to the monastery And everything changed once I started to use digital maps. And you can't do anything that we do without digital maps. And they're fundamental to transforming a monastery, but even transforming an entire property portfolio and the world when we look forward. Climate solutions will not work without maps. So this is an example of one. This is a polygon. And within it, it delineates all the different landforms, geology, hydrology, species, population settlement patterns, and ecology within the Potomac River watershed. And this is a line. It delineates the boundary between Turkey and Syria. And bird nerds might recognize this. These are the migratory flyways for birds around the world. So a map is one of the most powerful tools that we have for really understanding our world and creating blueprints to change it. They guide decision makings in business, governments, NGO operations and planning. And for the first time in history, after I'd found out the Vatican really didn't have these maps of dioceses, I and the team I was leading set out to understand the world in an entirely new perspective. Rather than geopolitical or geoecological, this was geo-religious. And in 2016, we completed the first digital global maps of the Catholic Church in history, the only existing global unified map that any of us have found, or my collaborators or colleagues over the years, was a province map that was created by a 17-year-old student at University of Chicago who I found through Reddit and hired. And the map was created as a drawing in GIMP. And it was very wrong. And he's amazing, actually. He was a great intern. That was there was nothing there. And the Catholic Church, how we can understand this is really the different layers and geographic scales of this institution. And since we made those maps, we've completed over 15 major mapping projects at Goodlands. Just some terminology here, which I mentioned earlier and now can clarify. Ecclesiastical jurisdictions or canonical territories. What do I mean when I say this? So there's a top layer, which I'll say is Admin 1 boundaries, which are episcopal conferences or bishops' conferences, kind of like the USCCB, which if you're in the US, you're there right now within the USCCB. And then the level down from that, these aren't all, you can see like in North Africa, they don't match one-to-one with geopolitical boundaries necessarily. Administrative 2 boundaries, like a level down, like a state like California, are called provinces. Ecclesiastical provinces are the only layer here that don't contiguously cover the entire surface of the earth. You can see these kind of holes in the Holy See. That's what here, and these are there because those are mission territories. To have an ecclesiastical province, you need at least one archdiocese and one diocese. And then this is the last layer down before we get to parish boundaries, which we have not done globally. No one has done that, and that will be a massive project if it ever gets undertaken. So this is what is called administrative 3 boundaries. And I use the word diocese when I'm talking about this level, but there are a lot of different types of dioceses. Like the blue on this map denotes archdiocese. There's also apostolic vicariates, mission Surius, all these other kind of different types of mission territories that exist out there. And why this is so important is land and religion, if we look back, I think are almost inarguably 2 of the most powerful leverage points for change. How we relate to the environment and resources around us, but also how we relate to the cosmology and contextualize our existence. They are also the 2, I would say, highest leverage points for conflict. I think it would be easy to say wars have been fought over no 2 subjects any more than these. So approaching land and the church from the start of Goodlands, why I ended up in that hall when I could have ran off and done that project on my own, has been always very mindful of security. Why this needs to happen, Goodlands, anyone, why religious institutions have to step up and actually look in the mirror and figure out how to work and make our land work for good and address climate changes, we own a lot of land together, even beyond the church. So there's about 24.6 million square miles of the earth are habitable. And faith-based organizations own 8% of the habitable land. So not just the church, but all of them. The UN estimates they own 8% of the habitable land on earth and 5% of commercial forests. And that is larger than India and Sudan combined. If we don't figure out, as the Catholic Church and also extended other faith-based institutions, if we don't figure out how to manage our land and property in ways that can ecologically promote regenerative systems and address climate change, we simply will not address biodiversity in time, the loss. So before I kind of mentioned, we are this massive institution, and with that, we have all of this land, showing now a 3D version of the map that I showed earlier. It's just astonishing. And due to that gap in conservation, I founded Goodlands. And I figured out the business model for conservation doesn't really work with the church because they don't pay taxes, and that's how easements are promoted. So we ended up going towards this triple bottom line approach. I had completed by this point my education. I had done site scale plans. This is an example of a site scale transformation of what I would say is a pretty typical, barren parish in Western New York. It owns all of this property, and people, I think, driving past this might look at it and not even think like, oh, there's something wrong here. But if you understand how ecosystems function and you've seen the potential of land, like I have, everything in this picture is wrong, but also everything can be transformed in a coherent way, such as adding in stormwater management, food allotments, recreation space. And now these slides, forgive me because my design instructors in the past would definitely not be happy with all the text. So there is not a very simplified version of this. So try to just blur this out in your brain and bear with me while I talk through this. So this parish design, you could say, making it ecological, involves a trail loop. It involves the implementation of a green roof on a flat area, solar energy, a flexible lot that could serve for a farmer's market, greenhouses that use underused land to establish local partnerships with agriculture communities that grow produce and help the needs of the poorest. It could establish allotments, community garden, even a sports field to help encourage health, playgrounds to draw people there and make it more of a community space and contemplative gardens. Instead of just having a lawn, you could actually just name it and intentionally say, this is the events lawn, and this is what we can use this for. Further, there's reforestation, rain gardens, entry planting, habitat corridors, canopy trees, which lower heating and cooling costs by up to 30% if placed correctly. Meadows, which actually reduce costs of maintenance, no-mow, place native plants there, and pervious paving, which is very expensive, but enables the restoration of natural hydrological processes. That's amazing, but to even do the plan for one parish costs $50,000 to $100,000. And this isn't something special that Goodlands could do. This is something I learned in school. Landscape architects, ecological designers around the world learn, permaculture designers learn, and it's just expensive and it doesn't scale, and neither does Ladata C. So the question behind Goodlands is, how could we do this? How could we take this approach and make it accessible? So we created a classification system of the Catholic properties based on the US properties we've mapped, based on their size, their general location, are they hospitals, universities? So now we have this typology. And mapping onto that typology is solutions for ecology, food security, migration, and relief, for starters, in addition to integrating market data. And that allows us to look at all the properties, say in the Los Angeles Archdiocese at once, and categorize them. So instead of the really wealthy parish that isn't just in crisis mode, getting food in people's mouths and clothes on people's back, and I don't want to call it actually a luxury, but doesn't have the luxury, in a sense, of thinking about trees. This kind of mapping allows us to put trees or stormwater or conservation easements in the places where they can actually make hundreds of times the impact if you put them somewhere else. We have to look as a community at our context, otherwise we won't make the impact that's possible. Also, we have to look at the property values and sales. That's the only way we'll ever be able to support not only putting things in the right place and not just one parish that can afford it, but also to be able to support the implementation of these programs. Now, that doesn't mean selling properties like we're seeing now in our archdiocese. This means being really intelligent about collateralization prospects and monetization with properties. And part of it is just knowing what we have. We have found that dioceses and religious orders, women religious especially, are getting ripped off by people in real estate. They do not realize that this industry is full of sharks who want to convince them to sell their properties as these big bad liabilities with weird shaped structures as quickly as possible. It's a mess. And then globally, diocese allows us to classify which algorithms we use, say, in San Francisco, which might be applicable in a diocese of the same class, which is in Italy, similar, say, Mediterranean, Californian coastal environment. This enables us to see the whole church, scale things, so once again, they become more affordable, which is a huge issue here, but also be mindful of security. Which diocese, one of the classes of dioceses we have is like crisis diocese. Are they about to get 100,000 migrants? Sitting down doing a plan with them doesn't make much sense to focus immediately on conservation rather than bringing in like CRS and JRS. Also security pieces, which diocese do we not want anyone to see, what's kind of going on there. And some of this classification is based on like, this is deadly heat waves under different scenarios in dioceses. Some of these are public, and I'll send the link. Tree density loss, so tracking tree loss, and a multitude of other kind of programs. I'm going to speed up a little bit through this. So because it's very technical, but I find it interesting, but so now we have this system of going from top to bottom. And in addition to the Vatican not even having a map of dioceses, this was the state of most diocesan property records, except not even a central office. This was one parish's property records. This is a public domain image, but this is essentially what we see in dioceses. We go to one parish, they own multiple properties. They're in file cabinets, and you have to go to every parish or the assessor's office. And that map I showed you of all US Catholic properties we made before 2016, or we made during 2016. And it could never be replicated, to my knowledge, now, because after the Pennsylvania report, most dioceses were advised to break up all of their property into mysterious LLCs and entities that you cannot mine or scrape because of their kind of hidden names, so that they can't be sued with those as assets. So that initial map even is almost irreplicable. So that's what we do at Goodlands is we make maps and we use them to make informed decisions, because you can't plan or manage land without maps. But the other thing is those maps that we make of a diocese properties, of a religious province's properties, even of Vatican jurisdictions, those maps are full of data that is so valuable this is the green infrastructure mapping, for things beyond ecology. That foundational data, which is very unsexy, it's really hard to convince people to fund or support, hey, we want to make a map, but that foundational data is transformative for all the operations of a diocese. And so we give them the data and we stand it up for them to manage or contract other people to manage, ideally. It's been a long process. This mapping really begets the digital transformation of organizations in, I would say, a really holistic way. And that information stands to benefit health initiatives in a diocese, education, et cetera. I'm going to kind of just go through this a little bit faster, just explaining why I'm at the Vatican. So forgive me if I kind of speed through this, but I mentioned that there were all these different scales that we have been working at, really looking at this in a coherent, integral sense. And the reason why the Vatican Cartography Institute is critical is right now I am like the one-woman geospatial information center for the entire global Catholic Church. So if bishops argue about ecclesiastical jurisdiction boundaries, I am the only person stewarding that data right now. I am the world expert in that. That should be under the Holy See, but it's me. Also in 2018, 2019, we were contracted by a Catholic foundation and a group of women religious to digitize, mine, and map over 50 years of Vatican data from this book called the Annuarium Statisticum Ecclesiae, which, unlike the data that we have in diocese boundaries, this was country boundaries. And this was hugely problematic because the Vatican never expected anyone to map this, and country boundaries are a massive signal for geopolitical positions. Why do they have Kosovo on the map? How are they going to label Taiwan? What about the boundary between India and Pakistan? They don't even have this basic geographic standard that every single country in the world I know of has. And by not having that, they risk, even with the Laudato Si platform, without these, they risk releasing a map that really pisses off a country. And I don't say that lightly. This summer, NASA released a map and labeled Taiwan as independent from China, and China called it unforgivable. The Catholics around the world, the hundreds of millions of Catholics in fragile states, deserve much better than leadership that are not thinking about this basic set of standards and policy that they need to have happen to make sure that those people are protected from potential retaliation of misrepresented geographies. And that kind of standard would be able to help any global religious organization. So that's what we do at Goodlands, and that is why I am back at the Vatican, is to deal with, I shouldn't say deal baby, but to manage this really massive gap that they need to fill. And because I'm kind of the world's expert in that. I want to, in the last 15 minutes though, talk about the details of the journey here and as a woman, kind of my experiences. So I'm gonna stop with the visuals and let's see. So my journey of faith, I mentioned I hadn't even been confirmed when I was thinking about becoming a nun, but in my early 20s, it was a winding road. And the woman in my life leading up to it inspired and moved me in so many ways. My mom is a professor of computer science at a small Jesuit school that I attended for free, thank God, in Buffalo. And growing up, my mom was getting her PhD and my dad was a molecular oncologist. And we stopped attending Mass when I was about 8. And before that, we had been really devout. My mom sang in the choir and, you know, we had First Communion. I was even on the front cover of the newspaper, I guess, some Easter vigil looking like some pious baby, holding my candle. And my mom was amazing in her history also of social justice. She had been a White Panther, which were white allies of the Black Panthers in the civil rights movement. And growing up in Ann Arbor near Detroit, she had always stood up for the weakest and the smallest. And she taught us to love and value charity without judgment to all people. When I was 5, my sibling and I had a friend named Ben, and he had a guinea pig named She. And we'd build these amazing, elaborate cardboard castles. And one day Ben disappeared, and his 2 moms also disappeared. My mom had to explain that his mom was a doctor and somebody wanted to kill her. It was the Schleppian murder trial. Dr. Schleppian had been an OBGYN doctor, and he had come home from his father's funeral service at a synagogue when he was assassinated through his kitchen window. And my friend's mom was next. And so they had to go into hiding. And there was my mom trying to explain to elementary school kids that somebody who called themselves pro-life was promoting murder. But we stayed in church because there was so much good to be taught, and we continued to be faithful. But eventually, we just drifted away. My sibling and I were into ballet and dance, as I mentioned to some people who were here earlier, and we wanted Sunday off. And going through high school, moving towards college, I honestly felt personally hostile towards religion in some ways. I went to this highly ranked public school. It was in the middle of the Buffalo ghetto, though, in high school, and it was amazing. Everyone was diverse and accepting. And after high school, I went to a Catholic school with a decent dance program, which I thought I was going to be at the time as a dancer. And it was terrible. The Catholics I met were really mean, most of them. They were these, Ohio suburban white Christians that just totally rejected me and the very small, about 5 of us weirdos on campus, including a queer opera singer who they'd yell derogatory terms at across campus. And that made me not only think that religion was kind of ridiculous, but Catholicism was definitely ridiculous, especially as I sat there worried about social justice and supply chains. And these people would go out, celebrate Target and Walmart shopping trips where people couldn't pay their own health insurance. I eventually left that school and went back to Buffalo, pretty dejected, trying to look for a new path outside of dance. And I got really into arts and became a community organizer, in addition to attending Canisius, where my mom taught, which was free. And I got to take advantage of that and do things like take Greek for 2 years and study the Nicene Creed. And my conversion to Christianity was stunning in some senses. I found I couldn't sit with God fully in the presence without Christ. I don't really know, I could explain it in a poem, but we don't have time. But and it was so beautiful. And the Nicene Creed and the dogma of, say, 100% human and 100% divine, homoousia, helped me get grounded. It prevented me from what I call a Neoplatonic funk of wanting to just get back with the divine and hold that almost ecstatic love. But without Jesus being 100% human, without the Eucharistic potential of the world as found and echoed through our sacrament, where it begins, the materiality became distant. And there was always a danger to fall to the Neoplatonic, the rejection of the material, or an overly materialistic view. And that's kind of how I became Catholic, was through that door of the axioms of faith and their truth, created this almost the pillars of support for this amazing tent of systematic theology, which is in our tradition. I was very annoyed by this. I was still having issues becoming Catholic. I was like, oh gosh, of all people, really? But isn't that funny how God makes you love everyone, no matter what, at the end of the day? And then, through that, that's how I got into the farmer nun path and was thinking about going that way. And really, the reason is this kind of, I would say, spousal calling to Christ that I do feel. And that is echoed in the vocation of sisterhood, but also how communities are forming now and where my vocation is going. I can say, honestly, I'm not sure at this point. But the experience of rising then, from being this kind of like the absolute nerd of RCIA, I would say. And my friends were best friends in college in the Catholic domain were mostly Jesuits and the staff of campus ministry. And most of the students, not all of them, there are a couple who really good friends and kind of weird, but most of the students were those Christian Walmart shopping, make fun of gay people, just kind of mean meanies. And outside of that, there was the rad trads who I worked with in the pro-life club at school. And there were the gay kids who I also worked with as a leader on LGBTQ retreats as an ally for my trans sibling. And these two seemingly opposite groups actually are where I found God. They aren't opposite at all. It was in these fragile, small niches of our Christian ecosystem that most people would never expect. And going through leadership, becoming this leading figure, I would say, of a young woman in the Catholic Church has been, once again, those little niches have proven to be the safe spaces, the unexpected places, the people that don't really always fit in. I have endured the cruelest betrayal and rejection from women who are Catholic, who espouse Catholic women leadership that I've ever experienced in my life in this process. And at the same time, I feel like I'm holding on to this kind of thread of where to go, with this, where to find the right community, the community that is uplifting and coherent of women and adult enough to have conversations and be themselves and be present, which so many nuns are finding outside of the church, which even I find outside the church much more in my generation. And how can we, I think is my question, create spaces as you all have here for the youth, for people who are millennials younger, where we need community so badly. And in the church, the communities I found more often than not were very strange. And except for, woman religious actually has also been a balm, these like little niches. And so I think, to heal the land, we have to heal each other. And to be a woman leader in the church, how can, the lifting up of each other, these ideals, which secular feminism of the new wave has captured so well. The question I have is really like, how can we transmit that? How can we, recreate and continue the legacy here and allow women like myself and people who follow, who become, even if the Vatican says yes, it's going to be epic. If they don't, still going to be epic. There's a lot to be done. But, how can we create a space for women who rise to leadership in the Vatican, rise to leadership globally, who weren't ambitious, like success seekers? How could we, where are the nurturing spaces, not the spaces that are cutthroat, that are toxic, that I think everyone on this call probably has experienced in some form at work, is really the question. I hope that's not too drab of an ending. I guess to kind of end with a very uplifting note, I would say is that a 26-year-old woman just walked into the Vatican and talked with prelates. And I've met the Pope one for one for every year I've been a Catholic. And this all is just, I think, the progress of having the intelligence and the wisdom and the expertise of a woman who's young and, to be honest, had no idea that I was breaking all these social norms initially. It's unprecedented, and it's just absolutely amazing. And while it's been a tremendous struggle for me, I know I'm on the shoulders of giants. And I know, regardless of outcome here, this is going to be opening so many more doors for the next generation. So I'm excited for that, and I'm excited to see how we can all continue to lift each other up. Thank you.
Thank you.